starting in just a second. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. President Firoz Rasool, Dr. Saeeda Rasool, Dr. Azra Pichot, Honorable Minister for Health and Population Welfare, Government of Sindh, Secretary Health, Dr. Kazim Hussain Jadoi, members of the Board of Trustees, AKU, faculty, students, staff of and AKU, distinguished guests from around the world, distinguished keynote speakers, Dr. Adil Haider, Dr. Zulfiqar Bhutta, Dr. Daniel Mark. My name is Zainab Samad, and I'm the chair of the Department of Medicine at AKU and have been trained and served on faculty at both the Aga Khan University and Duke University. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the series, Building Research Programs, Perspectives from Outstanding Mentors. This seminar series has been conceived jointly by faculty from both AKU and Duke and features talks from research leaders at both institutions. Many of the foundational values of AKU, that is, developing human capacities, discovery and dissemination of knowledge, bringing communities together, also form the underpinnings for this series. The world is faced with very large and big problems. The settings may vary across the globe, but the problems are often the same. The interconnectedness of our lives and challenges has never been more evident than in the time of COVID. To tackle these challenges, we must come together, and that goes especially for institutions with outstanding research leadership. In this seminar series, many of the world's foremost leaders in research who have dedicated their lives to discovering and solving problems will share their insights on their journeys and how they built programs built to last. On a personal note, I have been formally and informally mentored by all the faculty featured in this seminar series, and so it brings me great joy to introduce them and to share them with you. I would like to invite now my course co-director, Dr. Gerald Bloomfield from Duke University, to share his opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Samad. Allow me to also extend a warm welcome to the leadership of the Aga Khan University, distinguished faculty from AKU and Duke University, and the over 500 participants who are joining from Pakistan and across the globe. I am Dr. Gerald Bloomfield, and it is my pleasure to serve as a co-moderator for this seminar series representing this important collaboration between Duke University and the Aga Khan University. I am an associate professor of medicine and global health with a focus on global cardiovascular health and have benefited greatly from outstanding mentors. I couldn't agree more with you, Dr. Samad, that the COVID-19 global pandemic highlights the essential role that collaboration and team science play in tackling the problems of our day. This seminar series itself represents another example of how our two universities have worked collaboratively across many domains to improve health through research, education, and service. Since the early 1990s, we've seen numerous connections seeded and grow over the years, yielding a generation of trainees and leaders impacting the world for good. Duke has been fortunate to have recruited AKU graduates in internal medicine, pediatrics, infectious disease, cardiology, and other disciplines who are renowned clinicians, educators, and researchers in their fields. I would be remiss if I did not especially acknowledge a very recent example of the AKU-Duke collaboration, chairwoman of the Department of Medicine, Professor Zainab Samad, my co-moderator. Personally, it's been a pleasure to work alongside Dr. Samad on the Duke faculty clinically and to observe how she mentored and trained Duke trainees. I could not imagine a better colleague to co-moderate these sessions with. So on behalf of the Duke Cardiology Division and the Duke Clinical Research Institute, it's in a spirit of friendship and collegiality, excellence in mentorship, and fostering the next generation of leaders that we kick off this seminar series on building research programs, perspectives from outstanding mentors. I will now return the agenda to Dr. Samad.
Thank you, Jerry, for that shout out. I would like to now invite our Honorable President Firoz Rasool to deliver the inaugural address. Mr. Firoz Rasool has served as the President and the Chief Executive Officer of the Aga Khan University since May 2006. Under his leadership, the university has experienced tremendous growth, improved the lives of millions of people as a leading source of education, research, and healthcare, helped to increase the quality of services provided by other universities and hospitals as a role model that spreads international standards and best practices, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, and assisted the governments in serving the peoples of Pakistan, East Africa, and Afghanistan. Under his able leadership, AKU now operates in Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the UK through 6 campuses, 7 teaching hospitals, and 300 outreach medical centers, and treats more than 2 million people each year. Ladies and gentlemen, President Firoz Rasool.
So thank you very much, Zainab, and Jerry for your warm welcome and for co-moderating this very important conference. Dr. Azra Pechuho, the Honorable Minister of Health and Population Welfare for the Government of Sindh, Dr. Kazim Hussain Jatoy, Honorable Secretary of Health, the Government of Sindh, members of the Board of Trustees of the Aga Khan University, deans, faculty, students, and staff of Duke University and the Aga Khan University, distinguished guests from around the world who are joining us today, and in particular, I want to recognize the distinguished keynote speakers, Dr. Daniel Mark, Professor of Medicine at Duke University, Dr. Adil Haider, the Dean of the AKU Medical College, and Dr. Zulfiqar Bhutta, Distinguished University Professor of the Aga Khan University. This event, this particular endeavor, is extremely important in the life of a university. And AKU as a young university is very desirous and has aspirations of building, strengthening, growing its research capacity, its research capabilities, and the importance of mentors, outstanding mentors who bring international best practice and who are renowned in their own fields and in their own work is truly an incredible opportunity for our young faculty, for our students to learn from some of the best that can carry over into the rest of the work that we do. And doing this through a partnership is even more important. And I recognize Dr. Bloomfield's comments about the partnership between Duke and AKU, which starts with many of our graduates joining Duke, doing additional training and education, and then returning either directly to AKU or through ongoing work, even from Duke, are extremely important for us. And the importance of partnership is well understood. For many of you, over 40 years ago, at the founding of this university, was even done with some eminent thinkers, including the then president of Harvard, who helped write the blueprint for AKU. So this is not an unusual endeavor or initiative for us, but it's a very important one that we recognize and are extremely grateful to Duke for the partnership, for the sharing of knowledge and capabilities, and helping us develop our own capacities in science, in research, and in helping us understand what it's going to take and what commitment the university will have to make. For me personally, this is a great pleasure to be able to open this particular conference, to host and welcome all of you. And I want to just quote in the ethos of our university, in the words of our Chancellor, His Highness the Aga Khan, who said, and I quote, "If we are to become full participants in the knowledge society of the 21st century, we must embrace the values of collaboration and coordination, openness and partnership, choice and diversity. The spirit of the knowledge society is the spirit of pluralism, a readiness to accept the other, to see difference as an opportunity rather than a threat. And this webinar brings together people with expert knowledge from around the world with different perspectives to help us become a borderless global knowledge society. And it's pretty clear that we know that leaders are made, not born. And that development of a leader comes from mentorship. And the importance of this conference, therefore, that cannot be overstated. And that mentorship is often seen, is unseen or unknown. It's in the background, but it's always there because the guiding hand, the informal teaching and learning, and the ongoing guidance of experts to be able to do this. And I want to acknowledge, in addition to our moderators, the work, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Daniel Mark, who is a professor of medicine, as well as the Vice Chief of Academic Affairs in the Division of Cardiology and Department of Medicine at Duke University Medical Center. He's also the Director of Outcomes Research at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, and his research interests include medical economics, quality of life outcomes, outcomes research, and the quality of medical care. Through his work in national and international trials, Dr. Mark has developed a large network of colleagues and resources that provide unique opportunities to the young investigators he mentors. And Dr. Mark, I wanted to pass on our good wishes of our former trustee, Dr. David Naylor from the University of Toronto, who said he was delighted to co-write some of, or co-publish with you some of the work that you did jointly. The second speaker is Dr. Adil Haider, who's our Dean of the Medical College at AKU and Professor of Surgery and Community Health Sciences. He is credited with uncovering racial disparities after traumatic injury and establishing the field of trauma disparities research. He's regarded as one of the foremost experts on healthcare inequities in the world, with projects focused on describing and mitigating unequal outcomes based on gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, age, and socioeconomic status. He has formally mentored more than 100 research trainees. And not last but least, Dr. Zulfiqar Bhutta, who is the Robert Harding Inaugural Chair in Global Child Health at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, co-director of the Sick Kids Center for Global Child Health, and the founding director of the Center for Excellence in Women in Child Health at the Aga Khan University, and most recently, the founding director of a new institute for global health and development at the Aga Khan University. From his titles, you can see that he has been a founder of several research institutes, in many cases, the first of their kind in Pakistan. Dr. Bhutta has built large research programs and groups based in Toronto, Karachi, and Nairobi, with a special interest in research synthesis, scaling up evidence-based interventions in community settings, and implementation research in health systems context. I'm delighted that all of you have joined us, and thank you very much for being part of this. Zainab, back to you.
Thank you for those words, President Rasool. Esteemed guests, we are extremely thrilled to have the Honorable Dr. Azra Pechuho, Minister for Health and Population Welfare, as our chief guest. She's a graduate of Dow Medical College, a pediatrician, Chancellor of the Shaheed Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto Institute for Science and Technology, and also a veteran politician. She serves as a member of the National Assembly from 2002 to 2018, where she was the chairperson of the Defense Committee and a member of the Health and Education Committee. She worked very hard on the establishment of the Polio Eradication Initiative for Pakistan. She began her term as the Provincial Minister for Health and Population Welfare back in 2018. And as the Minister for Health and Population Welfare, Dr. Azra has worked on several initiatives like the Reproductive Health Bill, establishment of the Sindh Institute of Cardiovascular Diseases, Sindh Institute of Child Health, and establishment of trauma centers in Sindh, to name a few. She has also ably overseen the pandemic response in Sindh with the rapid scaling of capacity in hospitals in Sindh, as well as bringing a multitude of diverse stakeholders together to put up a response. In both her role as the chancellor of a major science and technology university and as a health minister, she has championed research-based approaches to tackle intractable local problems. During COVID times and other times, she has been a trusted partner to AKU. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Azra Picho.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good morning, good evening. It's a pleasure being here, and I appreciate the webinar that has been arranged by AKU with co-sponsoring of Duke University. I appreciate all the effort that has gone into organizing this webinar. At the same time, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Zulfiqar Bhutta, who's been a mentor for me when I was working in the pediatric unit in Al Khan Hospital. And his work on nutrition and malnutrition has really served a great deal of purpose for us to put in place our nutritional program. And we are still currently working on it. Not that we have had any better results, but we are hopeful that his guidance on the status of malnutrition and micronutrient deficiencies will help us to create a better nutritional environment for our children and our mothers, especially our pregnant women. And we are still working on it. We hopefully will be launching another program based on this concept. And again, health department is very much in collaboration with Al Khan University. During COVID crisis, during the HIV outbreak in Ratodero, we got assistance from your university, and it was really appreciated. And I think we could not have gone forward without your assistance and without your help, both in COVID and in the HIV outbreak, where you did stalwart work within the communities for us, at the same time bringing capacity to our health workers and our paramedics and our medics. And this really put forward the fact that Sindh led in the COVID response. And I think I should also mention Faisal Mahmood. Professor Faisal Mahmood was part of our task force for COVID, and he was always there to guide us during this crisis. So thank you very much, Al Khan. We appreciate the fact that the private sector comes forward every time to assist the government in times of crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Picho. Thank you very much for attending and sharing your thoughts with us. Before we begin with the keynote speakers, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping matters. We have 3 speakers. Each will be giving a 20-minute talk, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Please send in your questions to zahra.khan, that is zahrah.khan@aku.edu. When you send in your questions, please include your designation and affiliated institutions. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Adil Haider. Dr. Adil Haider is the Dean of the Al Khan University Medical College and Professor of Surgery and Community Health Sciences. He's an alumnus of the Al Khan University's MBBS program and also holds a master's degree in public health from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He's a practicing trauma surgeon and completed his residency in general surgery at New York Medical College and fellowship training in surgical critical care and trauma and acute surgery at Johns Hopkins. Dr. Haider is credited with uncovering racial disparities after traumatic injury and establishing the field of trauma disparities research. He's regarded as one of the foremost experts on healthcare inequities in the world, with projects focusing on describing and mitigating unequal outcomes based on gender, race, sexual orientation, ethnicity, age, and socioeconomic status. He has formally mentored over 100 research trainees, published more than 350 peer-reviewed papers. He also serves as the deputy editor for JAMA Surgery and is the immediate past president of the Association for Academic Surgery. Prior to being appointed dean, Dr. Haider has held several major leadership positions, which includes the Kessler Director for the Center of Surgery and Public Health, the Director for Surgical Mentoring Program for MPH students at Johns Hopkins, and Director for the Center for Surgery, Trials, and Outcomes Research at Johns Hopkins. He's also the recipient of several awards, including the Ellis Island Award of Honor, one of the most prestigious honors for civilians in the United States for promoting racial harmony and tolerance. His other key awards include Honorary Fellow, Peruvian College of Surgeons, Special Teaching and Mentorship Award, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Diversity Leadership Award, the Johns Hopkins University, and the Joanne Julius L. Jacobson Promising Investigator Award, the American College of Surgeons for Clinical Research. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Adil Haider.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Zainab, I was getting a little worried with that introduction. I still can't believe that's how I get introduced now. I still remember myself as a medical student at Ahan. I want to begin first by thanking our Honorable Minister for being here with us. And your presence here today is not surprising. You have been with us throughout the whole COVID crisis, managing it personally and being supportive of every initiative that came from the public or private sector. And we're very grateful for your continuing support and continue to work with you and the government of Sindh on a daily basis through our multiple projects. I'm also thrilled that the president himself was here and has introduced us and will be part of this group, along with members of the Board of Trustees, several faculty members, but of course, most of all, the medical students, residents, and young faculty who are joining us and are looking towards developing their careers in medicine and how they can move forward. Now, the title that Jerry and Zainab have given to me was Navigating Academic Success. And I will get to my slides in a minute, but I just want to tell you how thrilled I am about this course and also relay a little story about Dr. Zainab and Duke. So maybe 4 years ago or so, I had the privilege of being a visiting professor at Duke. And a little bit before I got to go down there, I got a phone call from Dr. Zainab Samad, who said, look, Adil, we don't know each other well, but I'm from AKU and you're from AKU and I work at Duke. And when you come down here, I want to meet with you and chat. And she talked about how she had just been given the job or had gone through the search for becoming the new chair of medicine at AKU. How incredible that would be the first woman chair, but how she would be giving up all that she had done at Duke and how Duke loved her. The next 2 days, I learned closely learned how much Duke loved her. And I am just so thrilled that your connections remain, that even though, and that's the hallmark of a great university like Duke, that they help train folks and are happy to spread them around the world to make a difference. The other thing I learned about Zainab and why I was thrilled and heavily encouraged her to come to AKU. Now, remember, I was nowhere near being dean. I was still taught my whole career would be in North America then, but I just thought it would be great for AKU. And the reason for that was just in talking to her, you knew that she's a woman who would, if you gave her a lemon, she would make lemonade. And this course is an example of exactly that. And the reason why I want to talk about the story is because that is the mindset that leads to success. It's not some special formula or anything. It's that mindset that no matter what the situation is, you figure out how to make it to help other people. And despite COVID, despite the inability to meet in person, we're now having this great seminar. So I just wanted to start with that as an example of where we are today. I'm going to share my slides. So I'll go ahead to share screen. And are you all able to see my slides fine?
Yes, we are. We can.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's great. So I retitled my talk entitled it, How John Cameron Never Worked a Day in His Life. And it's a bit of a philosophical talk. So I'll hope you can bear with me. I know it's a surgeon trying to give a talk that's more philosophical, but let's see how it goes. Here are some of my disclosures that I always give out before I give any intellectual talks. And as I mentioned, I'm going to talk, this talk was really inspired by a person called John Cameron. Now, who is John Cameron? He is, along with being a gentleman who loves to post on Facebook, he happened to be the chair of surgery at one of the very well-known North American institutions. And he was the chief of surgery there for more than 25 years. And if you look at his legacy, that, you know, people actually published a paper about it, it turns out that Cameron, JC, trained, when he was chair, numerous people who went on to become chairs of departments across the United States and around the world. If you count me as one of his mentors, there are several who've gone on and become deans and so on. So how is it that this one person has an outsized impact? I mean, just look at the number of people that he trained who eventually went and became somebody really remarkable. And you'll find that he always says this. Now, this is not a saying that he said, and he always says it as if he said it, but it's not really him, it's Confucius. And that is that if you find a job that you love, you will never have to work a day in your life. And so how do we find a job that we can all love so that we never have to go to work every day? And I will tell you, being dean at AKU is like not having a job. I love coming to work every single day. And what do you mean by love here? So now we almost get into the idea of like, how do you even explain this emotion? And I really like this recent definition. And that is that love really is built, not the kind of lust love, just to be clear, but you know when your patients say that they love their doctor, what they mean is that they've developed these micro moments of positive connection, and that you develop these connections with things or your job or the people you work with or the response that you get when you work with your patients. And the positive resonance you get from that leads to something that you love. So over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm gonna try to give 3 specific things on how we can also develop this kind of positive resonance in our jobs. And the reason why I wanna talk about this is because we have an opportunity as academic physicians to really be satisfied and have jobs that we love. So this is some statistics, about half of the people who have jobs are satisfied with the kind of job they have, but doctors are more satisfied. The trouble is that even though doctors say that they're more satisfied, many of them will say that they don't want to have their children become doctors, except those doctors that are really in academic or university practice. In fact, academic doctors are much more likely to tell their children that they should go into medicine. So what is it that academic doctors do, right? What is it? And that's why I wanted to talk about this specific thing today. What I've come to find is that if you really want to find a job you love, there are 3 specific things. This is what I've noticed academic physicians do. First, they figure out, what is their passion, right? Then they figure out a bunch of people that are going to help them get to where they want to go. And most importantly, they become masters of their terrain, really knowing how to do something. And so I'll go through each one in some detail. Now, what academic physicians tend to do is that they try to find something that has value for humanity. And nowadays, young people want to do that. And in John Cameron's case, the value that he had, apart from training so many people, is that he was the chair of surgery, and he was the most preeminent pancreatic surgeon in the world during his time. In fact, when he became the pancreatic surgeon, the mortality from a Whipple procedure or pancreatic duodenectomy was above 25%. And by the time over 20, 30 years, he perfected the procedure, this very complicated procedure, the mortality was less than 1%. So he really solved a very complicated problem while training a bunch of people. And that's how you can see why he always loved his job. And so if you can match a person's passion, right, with what they get to do in life, then you can end up with a very, very, very fulfilling career. Now, how do you map your passion? Turns out there's a lot of very good, YouTube and TEDx videos on this. And one of them, in particular, by Adam Leipzig, asks you 5 questions. And the questions are, who are you? What do you love to do? Who do you do it for? What these people want? And how do these people change as a result of this? And so I'm going to ask you, and Dr. Azra, I can see you on the screen. So I'm going to ask you if you would help write this down too, so we could see how you would do it. All right. I'll first give mine. Okay, I'll first give mine. And as I answer the questions, I want to tell you that my first identity, I might have a different job now, but my first identity is that of a surgeon. That's who I am, right? And this is a picture with our residents of my first case ever at AKU. But that's my first identity, right? So I'll give you how that map your passion thing worked out for me. The first question is, who are you, right? My name is Adil, not difficult at all. The second thing, what do you love to do? So what I love to do is I actually love to operate, but more importantly, I love to fix problems, right? If there's a problem that's there, I want to figure out a way to solve it. Who do you do it for? Very early on in my career, and this was actually even part of my interview as a medical student at AKU, I realized that I like to work for people who really don't have a lot of opportunity, who are otherwise sort of disenfranchised. These are the folks who I have always focused on. And even through my interview when I was there, I learned this about myself. What do these people want or need? In my instance, most people who I am working on, they want to have access to better healthcare. And how do the people change as a result of this, right? They would live to have longer and healthier lives. And so almost every major decision I make ends up focusing on this idea, right? I use these kinds of ideas. I use this idea of my understanding of my own passions. And many people will have, different things. So for example, I was going to ask Dr. Azra, but since her screen's off now, maybe I'll make this one up for Dr. Zainab. How about that?
Adil, I'm very much there.
Oh, okay. Your video went off.
My video went off. So if you would ask me these questions,
yes.
I would say, I am a politician. I love to work with the issues relating to women and children. And I do it for the people, obviously, and women and children in specific. These people need to have assured healthier lives, and therefore for children and women specifically, mortality and morbidity are my focuses, where I want to change that, the figures and numbers for Pakistan. As a result, I hope that I will be able to achieve all this. Thank you.
But you see, Dr. Azra, how clearly you're able to define that about yourself. And what happens is that many young people, we all struggle and wonder, so what is my passion, right? People keep, how did you find it? And that's why I strongly recommend, ask yourself these questions. And there are many other things that you can do, but I start with that. And thank you so much, Dr. Azra, for doing that. We should all give you a round of applause. It's not easy to do it so quickly, but of course, there's a reason why you're the minister. You did it in 10 seconds. So thank you so much for participating in that. The final point I'm going to make about mapping your passion is that if you look at it, only 2 of them are about you. Who are you and what do you love to do? The other 3 are an outward focus on serving others. And you've seen how our minister very nicely reflected on that. And so if you can figure these things out about yourself, what your passion really is, you can absolutely make a difference. Now, the next thing is, okay, you figured out what your passion is. Now, how are you going to get there? And really, to get there, you need a caravan of people who can help you and who will push you and motivate you. Now, this is a diagram that is straight out of my Career Development Award when I was very early on in my career. And you'll see that here I was the candidate, and this was a grant application I had put in to get some funded time to support me. And these are the mentors that I would have, and these are all the additional mentors and advisors that I would work with to build my career. And I was very lucky to get to work with a very well-known and established trauma outcomes researcher, a professor who was a MacArthur Genius Awardee who focused on disparities, and then of course a fantastic surgeon who taught me, the fastest way to take a bullet, to fix a bullet wound and so on and so forth. So I was very, very blessed that I had that. And many of the colleagues in the audience will say, okay, well, those you're working at these big famous universities out in North America, how does it really work in Pakistan, right? How does that work in Pakistan? And for that, I want to give you the example of one of my colleagues, Dr. Shahzad Shamim. So Shahzad graduated, like Dr. Azra, from Dow Medical College in 2002. And then Dr. Shahzad graduated from the AKU Neurosurgical Training Program in 2009. If you count it, it's not even been 12 years. In the meantime, Dr. Shahzad has more than 150 publications and has become the service line chief for the second term already for Mind and Brain. I was incredible, right? And if you talk to him, he will tell you that he has a group of people that have inspired him. Along with all the faculty at AKU, he's gone beyond AKU. So he's very much involved in the Pakistan Society of Neurosurgeons, and those neurosurgeons keep on pushing and advancing and so on. He's very much involved in the internship program. I think there's some background noise. If everybody could mute themselves. He's very much involved in the internship program at the medical college, and he's more beyond his specialty. So along with neurosurgeons, he is a very involved member of the Pakistan Society of Neurology. In fact, casually he mentions, I became a neurosurgeon because I like hanging out with neurologists, right? So that's the kind of mindset that helps somebody move forward. Another thing that I've noticed about him is that, it's not just the work, it's the group of people that you hang out with. And he, of course, loves cycling, and I've been out cycling with him a few times. He's always organizing groups and so on to go out and have fun as well. So it's this measure of like enjoying the people that you're with, and that enables to move professionally as well. The next and last thing I think I wanted to talk about was mastering your terrain so that you can create new paths. So, you can't become excellent at what you do unless you really work hard. Many of you have heard Malcolm Gladwell talk about how you have to have 10,000 hours of practice before you get to be an expert and very, very proficient. So if we're gonna have successful careers, and if we wanna move forward, it's very, very important that you become an expert at whatever you do. I'll give you an example of this. This is Professor Asad Ali. He is our Associate Dean for Research. He also went to Duke and did advanced training there, but then he came back to Pakistan immediately. Now, the thing with him is that he had written a research award that enabled him to have protected time. And along with being a clinically productive physician, he invested a lot of time in himself, studying about methods and so on, so that he could become an expert in environmental enteric dysfunction, right? On understanding why is that children are malnourished. And when I ask him about, hey, is there a website about you? He doesn't send the website about him, the one that I just showed you. He sends the website about his work, right? That's the amazing thing, right? Because he's just so focused on learning every single nuance about this problem so that I could fix it. And then most recently, I saw him give a presentation where he talks about all the different aspects. What he's done is he's mapped out all the different aspects and is now studying each one of them. And that is the kind of like expertise that one really needs to develop to be successful. Now you might say, okay, well, this is a full professor you're talking about. Mind you, he's a very young full professor. He's actually a couple of years younger than me. How about we talk about somebody who's a little bit younger, right? We talk about one of my favorite people at AKU. Her name is Zara Hoodboy. And she is an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics. Here's a news story about her, about how she is using artificial intelligence algorithms to figure out about thalassemia deaths, right? Now it looks like, oh, this is really cool work. But if you look at her PubMed, and this is what I wanted to show to you. If you look at her PubMed, you'll notice that she publishes routinely on methods about machine learning, right? Here's one, here's another one. So she is super involved in understanding how machine learning works. And then she's doing research about it. So the final point I was trying to make is that it's very, very important to master your terrain and really, really know about this. Now, as I end, I wanted to give you some real world application of how this works. And this is a qualitative research study that one of the research fellows who I'd had a privilege of mentoring, and as mentioned before, I've been so grateful that I've been able to mentor now 140 or so trainees. But this is Lisa Kodadek's work, and what she did is she did a qualitative survey of surgical chairs from across the United States. And what she asked them was that what are the top 10 things that identify a candidate who's poised for academic success? Like when they select, these are department chairs, when they select people, what are the attributes that they look for academic success? And this is the top 10. The first thing for academic success was this passion to solve a problem, passion for research. The second thing was, though, persistence towards a goal, right? And you saw this with Asad Ali's work, with other people's work, that they all have a goal and they're all trying to solve a specific problem. Next is collaboration and teamwork, right? Resilience, the ability to have a failure and then get back up. Then, look at these are all practical sort of, personal attributes. Then comes the research training, the formal research degree, the track record, the clear goals, et cetera, et cetera. So I want you to keep that in mind as you start to develop your careers. So again, how do you navigate a job that you love so that you never have to work a day in your life? Figure out what you're passionate about. Find the people who are going to be with you, who you're going to have fun with to move forward. And most importantly, become the expert and master the terrain so that you yourself can create new paths. And inshallah, you'll arrive in a life that has great impact. I know it was a short talk. I'd love to go on, but I'll stop there. And again, thank you very much for the awesome opportunity. My Twitter is @AdilHaiderMD. Please do tweet me, and happy to keep the conversation on after Zulfi and the other keynote. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haider, for those inspiring words about mapping our passions, assembling your caravan, mastering your terrain. We have a lot to learn, and I hope we'll engage with more of that in the question and answer. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Dr. Zulfiqar Bhutta. Dr. Bhutta is the Robert Harding Inaugural Chair in Global Child Health at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, co-director of the Sick Kids Center for Global Child Health, and the Distinguished University Professor and founding director of the Center of Excellence in Women and Child Health at the Aga Khan University. He is a designated Distinguished National Professor of the Government of Pakistan and was the founding chair of the National Research Ethics Committee of the Government of Pakistan. Dr. Bhutta has served in several senior leadership positions with the Independent Expert Review Group of the United Nations, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, the WHO Strategic Advisory Committee for Vaccines, and the UN Health and Human Rights Committee, among others. Professor Bhutta is an MBBS graduate of the University of Peshawar and obtained his PhD from the Karolinska. He has published 8 books, over 100 book chapters, and over 990 index publications to date, which is amazing. He's one of the most highly cited academics in global health, according to the Web of Science, every year since 2013. Dr. Bhutta's research interests include newborn and child survival, maternal and child undernutrition, and micronutrient deficiencies. He leads large research groups in Toronto, Karachi, and Nairobi with a special interest in research synthesis, scaling up evidence-based interventions in community settings, and implementation science. Presently, Professor Bhutta is leading 2 global academic consortia, one working on improving reproductive, maternal, and child health in conflict settings and humanitarian emergencies, and the other focused on integrated investments to improve child and adolescent health and nutrition. Dr. Bhutta is a world-renowned mentor and is the ideal faculty to educate us on building infrastructure for research in developing countries. Welcome, Professor Bhutta.
Can you hear me out, Dr. Gary? I'm sorry, I had a technical glitch at this end.
Yes, we can hear you.
And can you see the full screen?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that generous introduction, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm quaking at my knees following Adil, Haider and that stellar presentation, but I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to speak a little bit about the topic at hand, which is how do you build infrastructure for research? Well, let me start off by saying that the two things that scare me, in particular, whenever someone introduces me and my work, is the whole concept of leadership and mentorship. Almost everything that I've done in my own career has been through the spirit of partnerships and working in a team. And therefore, I want to make 2 points. One is that, as someone remarked some time ago, in a leadership capacity, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. And I think this is a process of lifetime learning. And the second really is this notion that somehow or the other, you have to lead from the front. Yes, you do, but if you really want to walk far as opposed to walking fast, you have to walk together with people. And that's been a personal journey of mine as well. I would like to start by acknowledging the fact that people do have enormous influence in one's career. And like others, I've also been touched by the influence of mentors, but more importantly by Sherpas, people who have led you by the hand and guided you at different stages in time. And not very surprisingly, many of those have been my students, people who have graduated through the ranks of those who learn from you to those who walk with you, and then eventually, like Adil and Zainab, actually become teachers in their own right, where I learn from every day. In my own career in med school, people who influenced me greatly were those who thought out of the box in many ways, and taught me also to think differently. My professor of obstetrics, my dear professor of obstetrics, Zakia Minhas, taught me very early on that you needed to look, even though you wanted to become a neonatologist, you needed to look at things through the lens of the mother. She was one of the first to tell me, even coming from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, that in order to become a good pediatrician, start off by learning how to practice good maternal health. And that's lasted me a lifetime. My dear professor of pediatrics here at JPMC, the late Professor Razia Rahimtullah, for not only guiding in and giving me my first breaks when she did not even know me, but the fact that despite having handpicked me and giving me a choice position in an old department, when the time came for her to see that she needed to give me an exposure to neonatal pediatrics, she readily let me go to a rival department to practice neonatal pediatrics. Phenomenal. And then in my training in the UK, where I did one of the first neonatal fellowships, Peter Dunn is 91 years old, still plays 2 rounds of golf a week. And with Peter, although he was one of the leading academic perinatal pediatricians at that time, working in the tertiary hospital where I trained, one of his attributes at that time that really influenced me was his enormous focus on community and population-based health. And he conducted one of the first perinatal surveys at a population level in southwest of England. So with all of that under the belt, no wonder when I arrived at AKU in late 1985, there were many things that influenced one's career. At that time, the university was just starting its operations. Neonatal pediatrics was non-existent, in the words of the dean who hired me. We needed to create systems from afresh. And that really meant creating a center of excellence at AKU that could provide care and services to the most vulnerable of children. And that's therefore not a surprise that in the first decade of operations at AKU, we focused on principally becoming the best that we could at that time. And if you looked at our workload in the neonatal intensive care unit that we developed, it had all kinds of normal things that you see in newborn practice in hospitals, but also a lot of stuff that we saw from the community: sepsis, asphyxia, prematurity and complications. A lot of our focus was on becoming better at what we did. And it took some time. As you can see, we didn't really start out by being a center of excellence from day one. was a lot of learning, capacity development, and principally innovating given the circumstances we were in. Reducing burden of asphyxia, improving our perinatal mortality outcomes that required close collaboration with our obstetric colleagues here. That's basically the time that it took. And it also became quite evident at that time, and that's the steer that we got very early, was that in the vision of our chancellor, we were bigger than what the four walls of the university and hospital would ever have us imagine. He wanted us to be a center, a global resource for health and health of women and children. And to do this, one needed to step out of the box. You needed to step out of the four walls of a university and look way beyond it. Some of the innovations that we did at that time was also with the view of doing things better, creating a mother-baby unit where mothers could look after babies and thereby reduce their length of stay in hospital to be able to do more. And also, importantly, reduce rates of infection. These are all, when I look back at that period of time, a desperate desire to be of relevance to the populations that we served and to the community. And it was quite clear at that time that our problems were massive. We were dealing with tremendous disparities, poverty, and differences between various parts of the country. We were dealing with differences in health system coverage. If you look at things like skilled birth attendants, some of the very poorest areas of coverage of the country were those where the mortality rates were highest. And we also recognized at that time that newborn mortality in Pakistan hadn't budged for decades. And therefore, this was a huge challenge, and it could not be done purely by just practicing within the four walls of a neonatal intensive care unit. To do this, one had to turn to outside influences and to look at this thing from the lens of what we could do together. And I want to call out a lot of hard work that was done at the early point in time. Another AKU graduate, somebody that we are extremely proud of, Anita Zaidi, as to how she influenced a lot of our thinking around neonatal infections and what could be done in community settings. I want to also mention another individual, a pioneer, in fact, the fellow who established pediatrics in Pakistan, our very first senior most, Professor Basti. He came from Punjab, he was in Lahore, he was one of the founding pediatricians, set up the Department of Pediatrics, and then created a division of social and preventive pediatrics. And within the first decade or so of his operating from that King Edward Medical College, the exalted institution in Lahore, he created the Gawal Mandi Project. And the reason why he did that was that he recognized that primary care in community settings was different from what you could do in the ambulatory care wards of a big hospital. And Professor Wasti's work influenced many of his students. And then I came back to Pakistan in the 80s. The fact that the only department in the country that was doing community pediatrics and outreach was at King Edward Medical College and its professors. And the two people that I want to acknowledge are Professor Shaukat Raza Khan and Professor Fahmida Jalil. And they set up at that time a community outreach project in Pakistan with Swedish support called the Swida Sarek Project. And a major influence and collaborator in that period was our own Bo Lindblad, who then came to AKU. Now, this model greatly influenced us in thinking, how could an academic department of pediatrics begin to work in community child health and also beginning to influence population public health? And I learned a lot from that by visiting them several times and listening to and reading many of their publications. But over time, it also became evident that it was, to some extent, a slightly flawed model. The reason why it was questionable was that it was, number one, totally donor dependent. Secondly, it was quite distinct from the public health program of the government. And therefore, there were questions around sustainability. And one of the things that I decided myself, that if I was ever going to do anything comparable, then I would like to do something that would outlive just the grants that any project is built on. And that was one of the major reasons why we wanted to take a leap of faith and try and see if we could work with the government. And one of the nascent programs in the mid-90s, started by the late Shahid Benazir Bhutto at that time, the Lady Health Workers Program. And if Dr. Azra is watching, this is one of her greatest contributions and a legacy that has potentially saved millions of lives in our country. This program that began with these community volunteers who were paid a small stipend still continues. And at the time in the 90s was federally run, and a program that had about 30 to 40,000 LHWs. Now we have over 100,000 LHWs. And the first fundamental question that we asked ourselves is, could we work with this program? And could we set up a hypothesis that this could help improve community perinatal care? And this important HALA project that was published in the Lancet some years ago was a culmination of 8 years of work in an area and a geography where we wanted to work with lady health workers and civic society. The area that we chose was selected quite carefully because of its external relevance. We wanted to work in a rural area. And when I reached out, it was actually, again, during the time of the People's Party government, that we wanted to pick a local government that would have some empathy and some desire to work in community settings. And we picked up the district of Hala that became Matiari at that time. We picked it up for its external relevance because it's an agrarian area and we thought it might have relevance to other parts of the country such as Punjab and KP. We picked it up because we could potentially have sufficient population to do an experiment, which was a cluster randomized trial in about 1,400 villages. And the rest is history. We worked with civic society, almost every village where we went, and asked gatekeepers, male members, if they were willing to improve the health of their women and children. We found great resonance. And we worked with the Lady Health Workers Program to help educate women, not through a formal didactic, but basically through a participatory process, talking about their issues, problems, and what could be done within their means, and at extremely low cost. What happened was enormous. We had impact on antenatal care within a period of 2 years. And remember, this is at scale at a population level. Improvements in clean birth kits purchased, which were purchased, they were not distributed freely, and an overall impact on mortality. We had a reduction in intervention areas shown in red in stillbirths, in early and late neonatal mortality. And this reduction was quite significant. We were particularly pleased to see a reduction in stillbirths because we hadn't really put any formal trained obstetricians in that area. They were already existing within the government system. And when we looked at that, it was very clear that what had happened was a change in population practice and people going to facilities. Today, these figures for Matiari are close to around 80%. And that's why, because once you give people a direction of travel and development, they typically don't regress or go back. So that was enormous, but it was done at that time in a manner which was basically learning. And what we learned through that process is that the influence that these projects have on improving population health is through basically what is a participatory democracy at a population level. In this particular slide, which is from a community session, you see the genesis of how change comes. You see this rather worried mother-in-law who doesn't quite understand what's going on. And is maybe skeptical, but she's there. She's part of the process. And look at how animated these young women are who are in that community, talking to each other, building the fraternity that would allow them to improve their means. And look at the future mothers here, the young adolescent girls, how inquisitive and how interested they are. And this was one of the reasons why this project worked. And it also taught us a lot more than we brought into it as innate knowledge. So over the next 8 to 10 years, ladies and gentlemen, we gradually moved our needle from a pure hospital-based research and laboratory investigations to much more community-based work. And it was not that we gave up hospital-based work, but the balance changed. And this community research also brought in two benefits. One, our work became of global relevance and was recognized very quickly. And importantly, right after that came national recognition and both at a provincial and federal level, our invitations to contribute to policy. Successive departmental colleagues, and she Asadali here, and a very young version at that time, Professor Saad Sufi, worked through this process over multiple years and projects, but infrastructure was an issue. We were living and working through rented accommodation, which often was insufficient. Our model was working through community health workers and data collectors, largely female, who had to operate from a place where we could have transportation and also safety and security. And this became clear after a while that this was both transactionally a bit high in cost, but also did not convey the sense of permanence that I was trying to put in place. We had a great fortune. If President Rasool is watching this is from over a decade ago when he and Dr. Haider accompanied us for the first time to this area to see for themselves how this had got onto the conscience of the local government and also the health managers in that area. It was clear that we needed to have a small field laboratory, but space was limited. And also we had to operate with sometimes measures that were not necessarily to AKU standards of safety and management. This is our small laboratory in that area from which emanated about a dozen important projects with biosamples. Nevertheless, we continued with our journey and never gave up the idea that one day we would have a permanent establishment there, which would be ours. This is our data management unit at that time in this area. And as you can see, it was really quite crowded. We also had issues, as I said, of safety and security. We were always concerned about fire hazards and others, and we just could not find a single building in this entire area that was built to standards that we began to espouse as AKU, AKDN standards. So our quest continued. And of course, like in any other innovation, funding is a big issue. And I'm very grateful that the university allowed us to work with potential donors, philanthropic groups, and also groups who had a vested interest in this area to see if they would invest in building and helping us build infrastructure. Now, their contribution would be the hardware. We would bring the software. So we liaised with United Energy, who do a lot of drilling, etc. And I want to pay a particular tribute to Asif Fancy, who was able to help us negotiate through half a dozen meetings before we ended up in Matiari one fine day with a groundbreaking ceremony. You can see Salman Kermani, then a newly minted chair of the Department of Pediatrics, planting a tree that is probably still there and helping lay the foundation stones. So this was the groundbreaking ceremony some 5 years ago or more, when we all established a first footprint in that area and rapidly built something which was to international standards and to AKU standards, a building that would have not only the design, the safety, but also the ambience, which is a hallmark of AKU and AKU investments. This center of ours, which is the hardware, the infrastructure, works very closely with the software, which is a human resource, and with the capacity that we developed in this area for work. We launched this with the president, as I said, close to around 5 years ago. We have been in this place, and I'm very pleased to tell you today that our center is the largest employer of women from the area who work in various capacities: health outreach workers, data collectors, data operators. And this is an investment in that infrastructure and software in that community. They will not work with us forever. They typically come for 2 to 3 years, and they go on to become teachers, to become other entrepreneurs in their space. And that's an investment which is very difficult at times to imagine unless you actually do it in this community. And they all come from that area. Dr. Azra, if you're watching, you've seen it in this center. This is our major investment. And also from that crowded space where we were doing a lot of our intelligence gathering, we now have the right ambience for people to work virtually. Our laboratories are state of the art outside of the Wellcome Trust laboratory in Vellore. This is probably the best equipped field laboratory where a lot of sample processing and equipment is housed. We've been able to do some landmark studies in this area to a large extent based on the infrastructure that we have established there. And we've done no less than 8 large cluster randomized trials, many with Professor Saidi Sufi in the lead. And our most recent study that's just been published in the Lancet is from that area on a community-based intervention for preeclampsia using lady health workers. And this has also been one of the reasons why we've been able to expand to many other areas, because of the confidence that we've got in working in such community settings. It has also allowed us to make the international collaborations around our adolescent work in this area with young women and girls. We have built collaborations with the University of Toronto. This is a PhD student, Susan Campisi, who's been doing a project there. Another one, Joanna Baxter. And they work largely with young women in learning how to do things with young schoolgirls and adolescents in that area. Dr. Azra, I look forward to talking to you on the 10th of September on our joint school nutrition initiative, where we will be sharing results of our survey with you and what can be done together with the Sindh government in this space. It's also a fun place. Successive people go to this area because they see firsthand the enormous richness of heritage and of culture that is the essence of Sindh. Seen here hiding behind is Abdul Lindblad, who has also seen what was done in Punjab and lost, and what we are trying very hard to build at AKU in partnership with the government and sustain it beyond the lifetime or academic career of any single researcher. So this is a journey, and I call this an unfinished journey as I close. And now it is my pleasure to try and shepherd this a little bit, jointly with the Institute for Global Health and Development and the Center for Excellence in Women and Child Health. But it's open to the rest of the university. And the things that we are engaged in right now and are in the horizon, in the immediate future, are an expansion of our center. We would have got it this year had it not been for COVID. We had got the expansion for the next phase of this center with another floor. We are initiating our population cohort studies in the last quarter of this year. We are expanding our services now to include the hospitals also in the next phase of our Umeed and O project. Matiari will be a site. We will be doing this with also strengthening transportation. And importantly, multi-sectoral work, working with school health, education, environment, and nutrition. These are things that are slated for next year. And lastly, also expanding to areas such as non-communicable diseases, cardiovascular disease, gender equality studies, local implementation of SDGs, and we hope that the rest of AKU departments and faculty would be interested in this space. So I want to close by saying that if you have a dream and if you have a vision, don't be daunted by the fact that you don't have the means to do it today. It is for groups and institutions and academia to help translate some of that dream to reality. And I hope that our vision and journey has shown a direction. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be happy to take questions down the road.
Thank you, Dr. Bhutta. What an incredible journey, and goes to show that impact can be achieved only through mentorship, working with teams, and the impact can be far-reaching, even beyond direct research productivity, really affecting the livelihoods of people that work in that space. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our last keynote speaker, Dr. Daniel Mark. Dr. Daniel Mark is Professor of Medicine in the Division of Cardiology at Duke. He's the Vice Chief of Academic Affairs in the Cardiology Division and founding director of the Outcomes Research Group in the Duke Clinical Research Institute. He has over 30 years of experience in research, cardiovascular disease, clinical trials, observational studies, statistical methodology, comparative effectiveness analyses, and the evaluation of the economic and quality of life consequences of cardiovascular disease and its therapies. The principal goal of his work has been to improve the scientific basis for diagnostic and therapeutic clinical management of patients with cardiovascular disease. His major accomplishments include defining the value of new pharmacologic and device technologies in cardiovascular medicine and quality of life outcomes, relating international differences in patterns of care, developing empirical tools for defining appropriate use of invasive diagnostic procedures, and defining the appropriate use of revascularization procedures. Dr. Mark has numerous principal author publications in the top clinical research journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, Annals of Internal Medicine, JAMA, and Circulation. Dr. Mark has produced over 340 peer-reviewed papers. He has also edited 2 books and has written 82 book chapters, as well as numerous editorials. His work has been featured centrally in national clinical practice guidelines in the US and abroad, and prominently in some of the most prestigious medical textbooks. He has served and continues to serve on numerous national policy committees focused on improving quality and outcomes of cardiovascular care. In 1997, he received the first Research Excellence Award given by the Association of Pharmacoeconomics and Outcomes Research, the leading academic professional organization in the outcomes field. Dr. Mark has also been honored by the election into the American Society of Clinical Investigation and the Association of American Physicians, and has also received the American College of Cardiology's Distinguished Scientist Award for his work in outcomes research. Since 1987, Dan has maintained continuous peer-reviewed R01 funding. He has served and continues to serve in leadership roles in over a dozen major NHLBI-funded trials, including HAT, SCUD-HEFT, PROMISE, GUIDE-IT, Cabana, Ischemia, TACT2, and Race Cars. Those are actually all trials names, and that's how cardiologists roll. Additionally, since 2002, he has served as a program director of the NHLBI T32 postdoctoral clinical research training program that funds advanced clinical research training for at least 6 cardiology fellows every year at Duke. He serves as a career mentor to both younger faculty and advanced level fellows. Since 1996, he has served as the editor of the American Heart Journal and as the editor-in-chief of the American Heart Journal. He also maintains an active practice in cardiovascular intensive care medicine. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Daniel Mark.
Thank you very much, Zainab. That was very, I like the way you enhanced that. I am very honored and delighted to be able to participate in this conference. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes.
This is a new experience. I think the first time I've ever given a lecture, much less an international lecture, sitting in my office at my house. It's a little bit difficult not to be able to see everybody, but it is the world changes and we adapt. So can you see my slides?
Yes, we're not on the first slide yet.
Sorry?
This is on the second slide, Dan, if you go back a little bit.
Yeah, okay. Somehow I've gotten out of, all right. How's that?
That's good.
All right, so I'm going to provide, well, a somewhat different perspective, I think, from the previous speakers who have added some very key points to the question of how to develop into a academic researcher. But you will also hear some themes that have already been made this morning that I think are very important. So when Dr. Samad asked me to prepare this lecture for this conference, she gave me the title, and the key word I thought in the title of the talk was ingredients. What are the ingredients in creating a successful clinical researcher? And I thought, well, like if you go to the grocery store and you're shopping for something, you pick up a package of pancake mix or whatever, and you look at the ingredients, so what's on there, different things that go into making up the thing that you desire. And so on my list of ingredients for clinical research, and perhaps there are other things that should be on this list, but this is what I thought were the main things, were the tools and skills, which I'll say a little bit about in a moment, but I'm not going to focus on those. And then the qualities and characteristics of a person who is successful in this endeavor, which is where I'm going to focus most of my attention. And then we cannot deny the impact of fate, luck, fortuna, whatever you want to call it. And we have to be prepared that life doesn't always unfold in the way that we planned for it to unfold or wanted it to unfold, but sometimes that's not such a bad thing. So one point that I would make very strongly is that if you really want to do important, impactful academic, in this case, clinical research, although I think that the point is certainly at least as true, if not more true, for basic science, which is obviously very, has a very technical and important basis to it. You need to acquire the proper tools and skills. In medicine as it developed in our history, and science even for that matter, if you look back over the last few hundred years, you see that many of the leading contributors were amateurs in the true sense of the word, people who loved the field and wanted to do something, but often were self-educated, and they were keen observers and good thinkers, but there was no technical body of knowledge that needed to be mastered that everybody agreed on as a prerequisite for participation, much less contribution. And now I would say that is not true. Just because you're an expert clinician does not make you an expert clinical investigator. So if you want to take that next phase and become a leader from the investigative point of view, rather than a clinician who's working with such a person, you need to acquire the appropriate knowledge and skills. And but again, as I just implied, the expertise that is required to do impactful research doesn't have to all reside within a single individual, and mostly doesn't. Nowadays, I certainly have nowhere near the biostatistical expertise of my colleagues, and that's a good thing. They don't have the clinical expertise that I have. Other people that are part of the team contribute important aspects to the mix. And so in this sense, the ingredients of successful clinical research is a team of people, each of whom are very accomplished in their particular area, but also have an appreciation for and even a reasonably detailed understanding of the rest of the picture, acquired often in the trenches from actual work. So if you're the clinician on the team, you should have clinical subject matter expertise is often the thing that you're bringing most uniquely, but you need to be still very solid on research methodology, and particularly in the area of research design and statistics. So, as I said, I'm not going to dwell on the list of things. We could go through a long list of what is it that you need to be able to know or do in order to qualify in this sense. That's a different discussion from at least what I was planning on. The other point to make about this is that things aren't always as you've heard. If you think about the classic textbook career development path, this is my version of the classic career development path for a clinical investigator. You start off with some motivation, some passion or desire to do clinical research. As you've heard from previous speakers, you acquire the didactic training, you get mentored clinical research experience or basic research experience. At some point, you become accomplished enough to obtain your own funding. And then after that, you have your own laboratory or research group. And at some point, you are considered an established, if not successful, clinical investigator. And this seems, very orderly, progression, linear. This is actually how it often unfolds in real life, however. Lots of unexpected turns and twists in the pathway. And so if you're going to make this transition from the desire to the accomplishment, you have to have some of the features, the characteristics that I'm going to go over in a moment, because this is not an easy path to trod. And if you're discouraged easily, this will not be a thing that you can do. one of the problems with having your office at home is that you don't always know what's going to happen in the middle of a lecture. This is the point I wanted to make about chance. Every investigator that I'm aware of, when you discuss in a relaxed setting, how did they end up at the position that they're in? They recognize with some reflection and insight that with a slight twist in the wheel of fate, things could have turned out vastly different for them, that their career hinged on things that they had no idea was going to happen, perhaps didn't even at the time recognize it as a good thing. It's certainly true in my career. Several things that happened to me that at the time I thought, that's it, I'm done, it's over for me, were actually some of the best things that could happen. But that's not to say that every bad thing is necessarily great, obviously, but you have to be prepared for things to turn out differently. And so preparing yourself, Louis Pasteur, who's the father of the germ theory of disease, which of course is very relevant to what we're all going through recently, is famously quoted as saying that chance favors the prepared mind. So you can't do anything about the fact that things are going to evolve differently than what you planned, but you can prepare yourself as best as you can to be in the right position to take advantage of those events. So before we get into the characteristics that I think are most impactful in developing a successful clinical research career, it's worth spending a moment talking about what do I mean by successful. And this is a personal judgment. Other people could certainly make different assessments. I think it's the opportunity to do important, meaningful work. And you've already heard the previous speakers talk about different versions of what that can mean for individuals, how to focus yourself in a way that makes the work meaningful. But the opportunity to do that is a real privilege, and the opportunity to make a difference. And then we all like to be treated fairly in compensation and the way that we are recognized within our institution and within the hierarchy of the institution, opportunities to get promoted and recognized and to have access to resources and things like that. And certainly not least in the list is the opportunity to work with great colleagues. And I have been incredibly blessed and fortunate in my career to work with some of the most impactful people in cardiovascular medicine. I didn't do anything to deserve it. It just happened to be one of the things that happened to me because I was in the right place at the right time. And so it is really something. And now I'd say the technology when I was coming up, it was kind of like who was at your institution. That was defining the people that you were going to be working most closely with. Now, most of the people I work with are on Zoom calls and other places in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. So as you're coming up in this era, I think that the opportunities to develop the network of colleagues with whom you can participate in research and do impactful things is greater than it's ever been. But it's also a little more challenging to develop those relationships given the distances and the difficulties of spending the time that really bonds a team together. These things are often listed as the ultimate goals of research, and I don't disparage them. I put them on the B list. That's my judgment. I don't say that it's correct or the best way of doing things. When I started in medicine, there was this implication that you had a transition, and at some point if your career was on track, you would get chosen as the chief of your division and then maybe the chair of your department, and maybe a few of you people would get to be the dean, and those are great and very important positions. But for many of us, that's not necessarily the path that we will take. And there are other ways, I think, but I would just say that it doesn't, too much focus on those kinds of external trappings are not necessarily a good thing. I think if it happens organically, and that's right at the time when it happens, it's great. Other people start a business, and there's a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities, certainly in medicine now, and academics even, academic honors. My old chief of medicine told me at one point that these were things that if at a certain point in your career you didn't get, it was a problem, but getting them wasn't going to give you anything more. So it's really their absence that was the issue rather than their presence. But he was a pig farmer from North Carolina and had a very iconoclastic perspective. And then, of course, you may be a very prominent person on social media or something like that. I won't say any more about that right now because that's a whole nother discussion. So with that prelude, I want to get to the list of what I've called the 5 core characteristics of highly successful clinical research. And you've already heard from the dean about the importance of a passion, an abiding passion for the work, relentless curiosity, resilience to failure, a deep discontent with the status quo in medicine. And I think if you don't have that, you're not thinking enough about what's going on. And then you have to be at least somewhat unreasonable. That doesn't mean you have to be unpleasant. You should not be unpleasant because nobody will want to work with you. But you can't be always willing to put up with things as they stand. You have to be willing to challenge the status quo. And so let's drill into these a little bit more and see what we can learn about them in the time available. So passion is as you've heard from Adil, that it's really the idea that you get paid to come to work, and like, are they crazy paying me? I would come anyhow. Elon Musk, I think many are familiar with from his multiple entrepreneurial things, Tesla, SpaceX, is a kind of a maniac like this. And he says, if you love what you do, it mostly doesn't feel like work. So, but how do you get to that? I mean, that's great to say, but how do you get to passion? What do you mean? How do you know when you got that? It's elusive to actually define what we're talking about here. I think it's one of these concepts that we know it when we see it in people around us, and we understand it, but trying to define it in words is very challenging and often insufficient. And actually, the definition that I thought was most interesting came from, found this on the internet, from Elon Musk's first wife, his ex-wife now, who had the opportunity to observe this phenomenon up close and personally, and said it's perhaps the willingness to suffer to achieve our goals. How much are you willing to put up with in order to get where you're trying to go? It's not the normal definition of passion, but it at least maybe is a test for whether passion is there in sufficient amounts. Steve Jobs is another example. He said that the reason passion for work is so important, and if you're doing really impactful things, is that it's often so hard to be successful that if you don't have the passion, any rational person would give up. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. Muhammad Ali, a great champion of boxing and a great leader, I think said, I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit, suffer now, and live the rest of your life as a champion. Now, most of us are not necessarily cut out to suffer quite as Ali did in all the road work and the gym work and the sparring in order to be a champion. And hopefully we don't get hit a lot in our jobs, but the concept is there, is that if you go only with things that are pleasant and easy, then it's going to be very difficult to succeed. Fire has to be there to drive you to where you're trying to get to. So with each of these characteristics, I've tried to pick an individual that I know, not necessarily somebody that everybody on the conference is going to be familiar with, but people that I've worked with personally who have exemplified this characteristic, and list a few beliefs and strategies that people can use to achieve each of these characteristics. So Judy Hochman is my first example, as somebody who has incredible passion for the work that she does. And she, among other things, is the principal investigator of the major ischemia trial, which was revascularization versus medical therapy for stable ischemic heart disease, that recently got published in the New England Journal this spring. An incredible odyssey of a clinical trial, one of the most difficult clinical trials that's ever been done. And it's only because of her incredible passion and drive for the work that she, probably one of the unique people in all the world, that could be able to do this trial. And she described herself a while back as saying, I was very motivated to make a difference even at an early age. I was going to cure cancer. I was going to do something big. She didn't know what she was going to do, but there was something inside her that wanted to come out to express itself, and it did so in this particular way. So beliefs that a person with passion may adopt for themselves is clinical research is my hobby. That's Rob Califf, as some of you may be familiar with, and some of Duke, of course, are very familiar with, told me that numerous times. He said, what I like to do for my hobby, I don't have hobbies. He has golf, actually, but aside from golf, he likes to do clinical research, and he's had an incredible career because he focuses his energy so intensely on this. Another belief is I'm incredibly fortunate to have the opportunities that I do. You have to search for the right situation. Don't settle for comfortable or safe. A second characteristic that I would suggest is a key is relentless curiosity. Now, Albert Einstein, of course, was a remarkable physicist of the last century. In the year 1905, he wrote 3 papers that literally changed physics from a patent office in Switzerland. He didn't even have an academic job at the time. It's amazing that the physics journals even took his paper. I mean, now I don't think you could do that if you didn't have some kind of a position to send in a major academic paper to a prestigious journal. They'd say, who is this person? And he came to exemplify the genius in the last century, particularly maybe because of the wild hair, but he described himself as having no particular special talent except for passionate curiosity. And I think that there is some truth to that. He kept wrestling with things and trying to understand at a deeper level what he was looking at. So relentless curiosity, I would say, is the search for deep understanding. Richard Feynman, another very prominent physicist of the last century, described deep understanding as the difference between knowing the name of something and actually knowing something. So we know in medicine the names of a lot of stuff. We can call things out with a diagnosis. In many of those cases, we don't know very much about that diagnosis. The ability to give it a name doesn't get us very far. We could call something a dilated cardiomyopathy. That's like saying it's an idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy. Like, we have no idea what happened to this person's heart, but we have diagnosed it. So, and if you just stop there, you're never going to make any interesting progress. You have to say, what happened? What? That's the beginning. Now what do we do? How do we figure this out? What happened here? Unfortunately, traditional teaching of science and medicine, I think, is often a curiosity killer. The way science and medicine are taught tends to linearize the process from investigation to conclusions, discovery, whatever. And there's a lot of this that goes on in a sort of formalism, even in clinical investigation now. You have to write everything down in advance, and then you can only investigate those things that you pre-specified and use p-values to figure out what's true and what's not true. That's not the way things actually work. There are many missteps and blind alleys. We have to take account of the fact that the process is really difficult to figure out what's true. It's really, really, really difficult. And you can't just lay it all out in a textbook way and expect to figure out, you know, let's just science it out. And it's like the genome project, I suppose, in a way. Well, we'll sequence the genome, and then when we've done, we're going to be so much smarter. Well, we sequenced the genome, and now all we figured out is that it's way more complicated. We still don't really understand that stuff. So the secrets of nature are not easily discovered, and it's vastly more difficult than our education prepares us to get to those secrets. You have to be prepared that it's a long journey, and you may only make a few steps of it in your entire career. So the exemplar I chose for this characteristic was Greg Stone, who's a very prominent interventional cardiologist and researcher, who was so enthralled with chemistry as a young man that his parents had to call a hazmat team to clean out the garage where he had set up his chemistry set so that he didn't blow up the house. The beliefs that I would say go along with relentless curiosity is the desire, the passionate attachment to learning new things and figuring things out, and that everything is interesting if you go into it deeply enough. There's really nothing in medicine that is not interesting. And we obviously have to focus ourselves a little bit or we won't be a dilettante. But if you can't see that there's interesting things everywhere around you, then you're not looking deeply enough. The strategies that I would associate with this characteristic are to read widely, and not just in medicine. Talk with smart people, mostly listen to smart people. Fill your brain with good stuff that it can wrestle with, and be prepared for it to wrestle with that stuff over years, decades. Let your patient interactions stimulate your ideas and questions. I think this is critical for those of us who are clinicians. The ideas that we can get from seeing patients, from interacting with patients, from listening to what they say and how they understand their situation and the problems that they're having is a gold mine of opportunities for inspiration and for search. That's my stack of books that I try to read, is just to show you that I live this particular characteristic. I don't claim that I've read all of these, but I know where they are, at least if I want to find them. The third characteristic is resilience to failure, and this is very key if you really want to succeed in academic investigation. And I've chosen, obviously, a fictional character. Some of you may be familiar with Rocky Balboa, the boxer, played by Sylvester Stallone. And it's the classic case of somebody who can take incredible punishment and still prevail. In this case, physical punishment, but the same principle applies to mental punishment and spiritual punishment even. And his phrase that sticks in my mind, it's not how hard you hit, it's how hard you can get hit and get back up, get back into the game. And there's no question that life is going to hit us hard in a number of unexpected ways, and it does. And we can either say, okay, that's it. You know, I didn't get what I was seeking, things didn't work out, I'm quitting. Or we could say, you know, okay, I'm going to keep going. And so Resilience is the thing that differentiates the people who have the opportunity. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to make a huge contribution, but it at least keeps you on the path. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computer, got fired from Apple at one point. Those of you that follow the company may remember this. And at the time, of course, he thought it was the worst thing that could have ever happened to him. And later, he decided it was the best thing that could have ever happened to him. He said the heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. So the exemplars that I've chosen to illustrate resilience to favor are two people, Roxana Moran, who's the director of interventional cardiology at Mount Sinai in New York. She applied to over 65 medical schools in the US and didn't even get offered an interview. She's now one of the most successful interventional cardiologists and academic researchers in the world. Valentine Fuster, who is a senior cardiologist, editor-in-chief of the JACC journals, got fired from his job as chief of cardiology at the Mass General Hospital. You could say that's the end of the career. He's done for, but he's actually made incredible progress since then and is still probably one of the top leading cardiologists and clinician investigators in the world today. So the beliefs that I would associate with resilience to favor, and this is something that, I mean, things happen for a reason. Now you could say, well, is that true? Is it true that things happen for a reason? That's obviously a deep concept. It doesn't matter if it's actually true because there's no way to know for sure. But if you believe that things happen for a reason, you decide, this is what I'm going to say when it happens. They happen for a reason, then you will find that you navigate this process more successfully. And that there are no such things as failure. There's only results. I got a result. It's not the result I want, but I can learn from this result and I'm going to continue forward. Reframing failures and setbacks as challenges to improve, tests of spirit or will to stay in the game. Characteristic number 4, as I mentioned before, deep discontent with the status quo. And for this, I've chosen as the exemplar of the cardiovascular research community. And so I'm blowing the horn a little bit of those of us in cardiovascular medicine. I said, look at all the evidence that we have generated because we were not satisfied. When I started in medicine, I won't say exactly how long ago it was, but it was a few years ago. We took care of acute myocardial infarction patients by putting them to bed and watching them. That was it. That was all we did. We didn't even have aspirin therapy. We didn't know, I mean, we had aspirin therapy, but we didn't know that aspirin was a thing. So it's been a tremendous journey to watch this evolve. And there is still very deep roots of investigation going on in cardiovascular. But before we get too big for our britches, as they say here in the States, it's good to get a reality check. And Alex Faneroff, who was one of our fellows at the Duke Clinical Research Institute, is now at the University of Pennsylvania on the faculty, did a study with a few colleagues looking at all the evidence supporting the guidelines for the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association, the European Society of Cardiology, all these guideline documents that we're so proud of. How much of that those document recommendations was based on high-level clinical trial evidence? And it turns out that 8.5% of the American guidelines and 14% of the European guidelines were based on clinical trial evidence. The rest of it is some version of expert judgment and opinion. So after all of this, sorry, I'm getting a little echo for some reason. All of this work, we're still got a huge amount of things that we could potentially figure out and study. So there's plenty of work to do for those of you coming up, looking at where are the opportunities. It's a lot of opportunity. Deep discontent with the status quo. What are the associated beliefs and strategies? In this exemplar, I've chosen Eric Topol. Some of you may be familiar with. He's now very prominent on social media, appears on all the big TV shows, has books. So he's become kind of larger than life character, but I knew him back when he was chief of cardiology at the Cleveland Clinic, and even before then, even as a fellow. And he said he did something, I think, which was very forward-thinking and bold for an interventional cardiologist back in 1996. So this is when stenting, coronary stenting, was really just coming into its heyday. He said, "I'm ashamed of interventional cardiology. The preoccupation with luminology, meaning what the inside of the coronary artery looked like. The capitalist tendencies have run amok, not being data-driven, the lack of science, the emphasis on the art and cosmetics of therapy over the real substance is shameful," is what he said. And he said it out in public. Very few people would have had the courage to call us on the carpet like that, but Eric did. The belief, I think this is very important. If you get complacent with where we are, you're never going to make any kind of important changes happen. Medicine is not nearly as good as it should be or could be. There are very few areas of medicine where we're doing wonderfully well. We got a lot of stuff to do. We need to figure out stuff. We need to deliver the stuff we know better. There's all kinds of things. We should not be content with how we're doing. If you're just going through practice and saying, well, I'm just happy to prescribe these medicines and refer for these tests, and that's fine for a practitioner. But if you want to be an investigator, then you've got to be more unhappy with the status quo. Strategies, take care of patients. Just watch what they're going through. Listen carefully to them and their travails and their path. Understand how their illness in the medical therapy we apply so proudly affects their lives. And the last characteristic, which I think is also important, is be at least somewhat unreasonable. Be pleasant, but unreasonable. And for this, I've chosen the TPA story, tissue plasminogen activator, which is really the story, also the story of the Gusto-1 clinical trial group that was co-led by Rob Califf and Eric Topol. So back in the day, when tissue plasminogen activator was first coming online, it was hailed as heart Drano. It dissolved clots, and people confused that with the process of cleaning out atherosclerosis. And so they thought, whoa, it's great. Now we can just clean out all this junk and we'll go back and eating junky food again and everything's great. But obviously that wasn't quite the case. Just a brief history of coronary reperfusion therapy, a couple of important clinical trial points to bring home the point I'm trying to get to, which was fibrinolytic therapy had been known since as a therapeutically effective intervention since the 1950s, but it was not until the 1979s to 80s that it actually started getting used in acute coronary disease. And in 1986, the GC1 group from Italy published a huge, at the time, trial. Almost 12,000 patients showed that IV streptokinase saved lives in acute myocardial infarction. And the earlier you got that treatment in, the more lives that you were saving. The concept of the golden hour, that you could reduce mortality by 50% or more if you treated patients within the first hour after the onset of symptoms. And around that same time, Eugene Braunwald's TIMI group published the TIMI phase 1 study. They're now on TIMI 70 or something like that. But this was the first TIMI study where they used a fibrin-specific, so a laboratory engineered recombinant TPA molecule that everybody was very proud of. We're designing the therapies that are going to get in there and they're going to deliver much more powerful therapy with much lower risk. And so TPA, the recombinant TPA, opened arteries twice as effectively as intravenous streptokinase at 90 minutes. That is 62% versus 31%, a huge difference. And everything we knew at that time said that that should translate into a big treatment benefit over streptokinase, which was a messy bacterial-derived drug that had a lot of side effects and a lot of bleeding. So the GC group and the ISIS group out of Oxford, England, did 2 trials in the early 1990s that were published, where they compared in a head-to-head fashion streptokinase and TPA. And shockingly, in 60,000 patients almost, they found the 2 drugs looked the same. There was no mortality difference between these 2 drugs. And that was like unbelievable for many of us. And Bernard Gersh, who's at the Mayo Clinic, a name some of you may be familiar with, a very prominent academic cardiologist, wrote a very thoughtful piece at the time when this happened, pointing out that this cognitive dissonance, if you will, between the expectation of the pathophysiology of the treatment and the outcome of these trials was critical. It had to be resolved. It could not be left. Now that there might be a tendency, and even today, there might be a tendency to say, well, it was an interesting idea, but the evidence doesn't support it. So it's done. TPA is done. Forget about it. Go on to something else. And he said, no, there's too much at stake here. The implications of this finding, if it's correct, are profound and far-reaching, and it needs to be resolved so that led to the genesis of the Gusto-1 trial, and Gusto-1 is really the foundation on which the Duke Clinical Research Institute was built. So we have a great deal of affection for this trial, as it gave us the sort of pathway forward for what we were trying to do. But with some tweaks to the therapy, it was actually found that TPA was in fact better than streptokinase for reducing mortality in acute ST segment elevation myocardial infarction. And this resolved the cognitive dissonance, but it did more than that. So here's a plot of the relationship between TIMI3 flow in the coronary artery and 30-day mortality. And you can see the Gusto streptokinase arms, the Gusto TPA arm, more reperfusion, lower mortality. And then all of these additional studies comparing stenting, acute stenting in the coronary artery with thrombolytic therapy showed that if we could open the artery even more effectively with mechanical means, we could vastly reduce the mortality risk beyond that achievable by the accelerated TPA regimen that I just described. And indeed, a pooled analysis of 10 studies, 4,000 patients. Now remember that the Gusto-1 trial used 10,000 patients per treatment arm, 40,000 patients. The evidence based on which we now practice, which is primary PCI for ST segment elevation acute myocardial infarction in the States, and I think in most of Europe particularly. I don't know how widely distributed it is across the rest of the world, but if the patients can be treated in a timely fashion, they get primary PCI, and that's based on much less evidence. But it's because the evidence fits the model that was validated by the Gusto-1 study and not by the GC ISIS studies. So if we had not challenged that, we would not be doing primary PCI for acute myocardial infarction today, and there would be many more patients who have died than would have otherwise. So be at least somewhat unreasonable. The beliefs and strategy, this is the Gusto-1 steering committee, Rob Califf and Eric Topol in the center at the unveiling of the clinical results of Gusto. The beliefs, I'm right, others are wrong. Obviously, you got to be careful with that, not to take it too far, but a certain amount of confidence in your own beliefs is important. I can succeed where others have failed. I can figure this thing out. And the strategies, when you feel you have a worthwhile idea, pursue it with relentless determination. Be nice, but don't give up. Now, obviously, you may not always be able to achieve that, but you have to struggle with it at least as much as you feel you can and are able to. I will just conclude by mentioning one final thought, using Paul Armstrong, who's a very prominent Canadian cardiovascular investigator, former chair of medicine at the University of Alberta, and a friend of many of us at the DCRI, who said that a career in clinical investigation offers opportunities that are as rich and diverse as the spectrum of colors in a rainbow. And the options to reinvent yourself along the way are extraordinary. There isn't a better job in the world. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this wonderful seminar. Look forward to the discussion.
And thank you, Dr. Mark. That was a tour de force. We'll take so much away from that talk, and encouraging everyone to be unreasonable, but not unpleasant. We'll now start our question and answer session. And again, I just want to thank all of our distinguished guests and speakers for phenomenal talks this morning. To our attendees, as many of you are already doing, to ask a question, please send in your questions to zara.khan@aku.edu. We may see a slide up here in a second with that email address, but by reminder, it's zahrah.khan@aku.edu. We ask that you include with your question who it's directed to, if any, and it would be helpful as well to include your name and institution. I do encourage you, if you do have questions, to get them in early, because we're getting many questions in and we hope to be able to address many of them. I will urge our speakers to kindly be succinct with your answers so that we can address as many questions as possible. So as I mentioned, we have many questions coming in, so I'll start with the first one. This seminar has global reach, and we have a question from Nora, who is joining us from Aga Khan in Nairobi. And this question is, I'll direct to all of our speakers and President Fasool as well, and Dr. Azra, if you're still on the line, although I'm not sure they're both on the line at this point. Many of you spoke about the life course and what you've experienced over your career. And the question is there an age limit to mapping one's life? Do you just map it at one time, or do you readjust this over the rest of your career? We'll go in order of speakers, so I might start with Dr. Haider and Dr. Bhutta, and then Dr. Mark, to address how you navigate your life's map over the course of your career. Dr. Haider, you're on mute.
So first of all, I don't think humans have an expiry date. I think that it is never too late to map one passion. And you know, if you do that now and you look back and say, oh, well, this is what I really want to be doing, but this is what I'm doing, you have a chance to adjust and change. I also think people go through different phases of their career. And very briefly, you know, my first 10 years, you know, I was much more of a surgeon, and I then became more of a scientist. And now I'm, you know, a lot more administrator and researcher and much less of a surgeon. And so we do that, but we always, in my mind at least, I always calibrate, you know, am I still true to what I hoped I would be able to do? And then of course, over time, these things may change. So you probably need to go and look at it every so often. But it's never too late to do it.
Dr. Bhutta, would you like to address the question?
As someone who's a shade older than Adil, I'm delighted to tell you that I totally agree with Adil. I mean, you know, it's a question of a lifetime of learning. And I can tell you from my own personal life and journey, which I hope is still continuing, I actually did not have formal research training. I learned on the job. At that time, this whole model of particularly public health and outreach research did not exist. When I came back, it was basically, oh, you want to do community work? Well, outsource it to a different department who did community health sciences and be done with it. This is not your want as a practicing academic pediatrician and neonatologist to boot. So I actually did a PhD at the age of 42. Why did I do a PhD at the age of 42? Because I wanted to. I thought this would help me understand some of the nuances of applied research. And it was one of the best decisions I'd ever made. In my 50s, I agreed to take over the integration of a department of obstetrics and pediatrics and neonatal pediatrics, like herding cats and dogs. At that time, people asked me to go and take a sanity test. And I never regretted that. So I think you learn all the time, and particularly to the young people who have asked a range of questions, some of which I've seen. As was said, don't ever let anybody tell you never. If you really believe in something, you can achieve it, provided you have a range of things that go in your favor: an inquisitive mind, resilience, the ability to learn, the ability to pick yourself up when you fall down. And you will have falls, you will have setbacks. The easiest thing in life is with setbacks to say, I'm done, I'm not doing this anymore. But you will find increasingly again and again that the people who succeed, particularly with difficult things, are those who persevere. So I think, to answer your question, it is really lifelong learning. And whether you are a resident, a fellow, an intern, a junior faculty member, or a full professor, if you really want to embark on something, you can embark on it carefully, provided you have the right ambience, the right environment, the right partners, the right colleagues. And there, it will bring you great satisfaction to be able to deliver many things that you have otherwise thought impossible. But remember, you can't do it as a lone wolf. As I've said time and time again, in public health, particularly in health research that impacts populations, no lone wolves seldom succeed. They may have an influence, beyond their position, but to have lasting influence, you need to build teams. You need to build multi-generational teams and invest in the future if you don't want to see your life's work disappear. Thank you. Great question.
I'll just add my 2 cents. I agree with everything that the others have said. I was, Jerry, in thinking about the common thing that we do when we're interviewing young people for residency, for fellowship, for faculty positions. What's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? And at least for myself, if I do such a sort of conventional thing, I don't expect that this is actually what's going to happen. I'm just interested to see how they're thinking about it. So I wouldn't expect that, we make a plan and then the life happens and opportunities happen, doors open, doors close. And we either react successfully, we keep our balance and we adjust, or we get knocked over and then we decide if we're going to get out of the game completely or if we're going to readjust. But I think that there's the time to quit is when you lack the characteristics to be successful. So if you're just tired of it and worn out, but that's true of medicine itself, I think, is that there's no, you get into medicine at a certain phase, you finish your training, you pass your examinations, you're a fully certified clinician, you're not done learning. You may be done with testing, although at least in the States, we got this continuing certification kerfuffle thing going on, but if you're going to continue to serve your patients, you have to continuously update your skills and understanding. So when you get tired of doing that, you should step back And if you're not tired of doing that, you keep going, and you just, but you keep your eyes open and you look for opportunities to make a difference.
Thank you. Dr. Samad?
Honestly, Jerry, I think whatever our Dean and Professor Bhutta and Dr. Mark have said, I really don't have much to add there, actually. I'll wait for another question.
Excellent. I'll pull up the next question here. This is one coming from AKU, from Asrar, who's a research fellow. This is to all the panelists again. The question is it a good idea to pursue a purely 100% research career in early stages of your career, or practice in a clinical setting and gradually research in clinical practice? So this is a very relevant question, and a question I think many of you have dealt with over your careers. What is the right balance of clinical versus research activity, especially in that early to mid-career phase before you're more established? And we'll go in the same order as the presentations.
You know, this is a very frequently asked question, and many young investigators think that they have to have a very specific amount or a very large amount of protected time in order to eventually become researchers. But if you look at some of the best researchers, you'll notice that they have developed clinical expertise, and depending on your field and the kind of fellowship and training that you have to sort of self-judge when you know you've done a lot. I'll tell you in my instance, for my first 3 years, you know, I was the busiest, maybe first 5 years, I was the busiest trauma person. And even when I got a K award, I ended up taking the same amount of call because I wanted to become clinically good. I loved doing it. And so it depends on what you really want to do. I will say that if you are especially in a procedural specialty, like interventional cardiology and so on, you really, and you want to become a clinical scientist, you do have to spend time training yourself. And the first few years after finishing training, when you are responsible as the consultant and as the attending for another human's life, when you are the final word for it, it's a very different feeling. And a few to several years of getting that under your belt certainly will establish your ability to develop good clinical questions. And so the usual pathway that Daniel described, where, you know, clinical, and then you get some research training in the middle, and then you move on, that's why that is the normal pathway. That's what most people do end up doing. So no, unless you want to be a 100% researcher, I would not go for too big of a research thing, like more than 50% early on in your career. Zulfi?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think I would repeat what I just said, is a lot depends upon the direction of travel, and importantly, as I mentioned, you know, who are your partners in this endeavor? So in terms of what we need to do at AKU is increasingly strengthen and enlarge the model of creating these interdisciplinary and multi-sectoral research groups. And that also between not only people working in hard medical sciences, but between social sciences. In your own work, Adil, I mean, you know, if you were looking at inequities and disparities today, and in the environment where we work in, we would bring in people who are dealing with anthropology, dealing with issues of women, empowerment, gender, socioeconomic driver, structural determinants of health. And those kind of things are increasingly things that require universities. They can never be done even within departments. They require networks and working with people who come from different disciplines. So I would say, particularly for the people out there who are looking at bigger questions, try and find collaborators, try and find people who will help you with many of those questions. And I must tell you that, this is not a barren landscape. I've been very pleased to see that in Pakistan also, because I lead the Health and Allied panel at the Higher Education Commission, and we increasingly see applications coming in. This is where many universities are going. Centers of excellence and learning are going. So yeah.
I agree with the other panelists, and I think that in my area, the issue comes up a lot of people who want to be expert clinical investigators, but also want to be expert in a very defined area of cardiovascular medical practice. Somebody who does interventional cardiology or electrophysiology or imaging, but procedural specialists in particular, in surgery, of course, would be in the same category. You need to be credible among your clinical colleagues and to be viewed as a leader in the clinical arena. You need to have the experience and the time spent to achieve that and to have real excellence in technical abilities. But you also need to spend time. There is a struggle, and it's not easy. And sometimes, as the grandfather of our investigation team at Duke, Eugene Stead, used to say in a somewhat facetious way, but if you can't get your work done in 24 hours, you need to work nights. And what he meant by that is not always going to be comfortable if you want to strive for something. But people do it every day, and so we know it's possible. And there's no one correct formula. If you're not a clinician and you want to work in the field, then you've got to, you have to educate yourself at least to some degree about the medical aspects of the things. You're not going to be the same level of expertise, but you do need to understand at a real level what the health problems are that you're proposing to study. If it's just a bunch of numbers that are being manipulated around on a spreadsheet, then I don't think that's ever going to be as good as somebody who really understands the problem from a conceptual and detailed perspective. But you don't have to be the expert in everything. The team is going to be able to help you.
Yeah, so Jerry, I would say that, there are two examples that come to my mind within AKU when I was a med student. There are two people who actually just pursued 100% research careers immediately after med school. One of them was Danish Salihin, who started the PROMISE study, the biggest ever genetic study on young MIs in Pakistan, and he started that as a medical student. The other person was Saad bin Umar, who's a classmate of Dr. Dean Adil Haider's. And we all thought, what is he thinking? He's not gonna go do residency, learn more about clinical medicine. But that's what he did. He wanted to do public health. He understood what the issues were that needed to be dealt. He got that training in medical school, and then he went off and did his thing. He's now the director for global health at Yale, and has done a ton of work on vaccines and is an internationally recognized researcher in that space. So I think that 100% research careers are possible. You have to have the right environment to kickstart them. I think I'm going to take the next question. We have a question from Ambreen Gowani, who's a senior instructor in the School of Nursing. And this is to all panelists, but I wonder if Dan can take this question. Actually, it's two questions. How much does a selection of an exceptionally adroit researcher mentor contribute to building a research program, and how do we address it if there's none? And the second part to that question is, in the absence of a network of national research grants, how can we address the challenge of funding innovative research projects by researchers who are relatively nascent and lack mentorship too? And this is, I think, and I chose this question because, I think that's is an issue and a worldwide problem, but more so in developing countries.
Well, I'm glad that you gave me an easy question to address. So it's obviously these are critical issues that we struggle with every day. If there is the quality of the mentor is critical. Now, I would say that at your institution, if what I observed when I first came to Duke, everybody who was chosen to be a cardiovascular fellow had to identify with a research lab. So we were a very research-centric program. And basically your acceptance to the fellowship depended upon the research lab accepting you as a future trainee. And so each of those were different mentors. And what I observed in watching this over a number of years was some labs were very successful at producing a lot of trainees who would go out and do great things, and other labs were not. None of them went into investigation. They all became practicing clinicians. There's nothing wrong with that, but if the goal is to produce academic researchers, that's not achieving the goal. And so it was clear that there was a difference in the quality of the mentorship from that perspective, even though that may have totally different implications from the point of view of clinical training. But I think in the modern era, the answer is, if possible, you look outside your narrow area. Maybe you can find a mentor who will be willing to take you on in another therapeutic region, who's good at mentoring from a career point of view, doesn't have the technical expertise of the field, but that's not necessary. Now we have essentially, I think, re-envisioned the thing as a team, a mentorship team. So you work with multiple mentors during the course of training. One person may be an expert in this particular area. You take from that person what they're capable of giving to you. Find somebody else in a different area that you want to gain some expertise with. And that maybe the other one person who serves as what I would call a career mentor is not even in your same specialty or therapeutic area. And that can work too. If there's no opportunities within the institution that you're at, then the question is, can you build something remotely? Can you develop a relationship? And that's obviously harder because it's there's just a lot of structural barriers that are in place that make that difficult. But it's not impossible. I think if you can get engaged with somebody who takes a fancy to you and sees potential and is willing to invest the effort, then it may happen. Or it may be that you need to move to a different institution for a year or two to get some advanced training in a particular area. And that used to be a lot more common, I think, in the past than it is now, where people spent a year at an institution and they spent a year at another institution and another institution, and kind of moved around a lot in the course of a training program. And now we tend to stay put until we're finished, I think, much more. Or you can go to a public health school and get some training that way, or, there's, I think, a variety of different ways. The other part of the question that you asked, which was, is even more difficult, is what if there are no resources to support your research? That is an incredibly difficult problem. Some kinds of research can be done at home by the candlelight of the evening, but most of the big stuff that people want to do takes resources. It takes, there's a certain amount of what we would refer to here, I guess, is sweat equity. It's like, I'm going to put in the energy to make this happen. But there's some undeniable amount of infrastructure that is required for really impactful things that has to be present. And if it's not present, again, you have to look around and say, maybe I need to go somewhere where it is present, at least to get to the point where I could come back and build this. But if I'm starting out in my career, I'm not in a position to build it necessarily, or to persuade the key decision makers or policy makers to invest in it. But go somewhere else, develop that skill set, develop that portfolio of accomplishment, and then bring it back and say, now let's talk. What can we do here? What's the investment? And be aware also, I think, that at least, again, looking from the state's point of view, that for a lot of things that we do, even in academics, very much so in academics now, you have to make the business case for it. Why is it a good business decision? It seems like, that's a crazy idea for medicine to be talking about the business case for taking care of people, but it is what it is. And I think, the medicine that we use now is increasingly more expensive, technology-based. It costs money, and somebody has to pay. And so if they have choices among things that they can pay for, they have to feel like they're investing their money wisely. And that is a decision that has to be based on some cold, hard analysis and compelling argumentation, persuasion. So that's another skill set that is required.
Thank you, Dan. So our next question is from Anam Ehsan, who's a final year medical student at the Aga Khan University. And she says, incredibly inspiring talks by everyone. Thank you for all the speakers. And I'm actually going to put this question to Dr. Bhutta and Dr. Jerry Bloomfield in the interest of time. How important is it to be razor focused in your research ideas? Is it more important to truly master a particular niche, or perhaps have broader ideals such as contribution to global health and allow oneself to avail opportunities within that domain?
So I don't think it's an either or. It really depends upon the nature of the question, and it can vary at different times. And there are clear examples, and the Dean mentioned Asad Ali's work, where although he's been broad, he's also at times been very laser focused on understanding some of the mechanisms and dynamics. So I think it depends upon truly the question that you're interested in. In some stages, the implications of your work would require a very broad approach. And in other instances, you need to do things in depth, which will require a laser focus on understanding things properly. And that's one of the benefits that you get if you're part of a team. That in a team, there are people who will at times have great in-depth focus, and there are others who are broad focused in terms of the linkage of the work to public health and policy. So there isn't a cookie cutter approach to this. I mean, it really depends upon your own research journey and learning. And there are times when one has to work with one's students and trainees and colleagues to encourage them to be a bit more focused. And there are other times when you want them to see the forest for the trees. So both are dependent upon your question and what group are you working in, but I wouldn't a priori fix that you're only going to have a very narrow question or a broad question that is potentially all over the place. You will determine this as you go along in your research career.
Can I just say something to that?
Please, Dean Haider, please.
Add on what Professor Bhutta has said. It is very important as you do this and you have the broad thing to have a niche of some, especially if you're doing research, some research methods and so on that you are really good at and you are like the expert at. And so, for example, you gave the idea of Dr. Asad Ali. He's also very, very well trained in translational research. The other example I gave with Dr. Zara Hoodboy, she's building this whole thing about machine learning. So if you go to her bookshelf, there's probably no book on machine learning that she's not reading. So if you want to move forward, it's important to be an expert, and that's how you will be a good team member. What Professor Bhutta has said, right? You got to be part of a team. So if you really get to know some specific tools really well, early on, you can be a productive team member, and that just makes the whole thing work much better. So I just thought I'd add that. Thank you.
Thank you. That is right on point. And as to respond to Dr. Samad, I don't have a lot to add to what Professor Bhutta, indeed Haider, has already said, but I think about my own trajectory in global health research, and I echo Dr. Mark's point that, I've used the word obstinate. Maybe I should change it to unreasonable. At the beginning, if you are forging a career in a path that isn't as established at your university under a setting that you're working, that laser sharp focus, that passion, the ability to persevere even when you may get knocked down is very critical. But at the same time, realize that your mentors have been down similar roads, and your mentors can see the forest when you're to carry the analogy a little further, chopping down a tree at a time, and to really be able to listen to advice from those who have your best interests at heart and who have the experience to lead you. Is how I would answer that question as well. I just want to comment that this has been an absolutely outstanding inaugural session for our seminar series. We are coming to the end of our time. I want to thank again our faculty, our distinguished guests, and our attendees for their engagement with our speakers. As we come to the close of day one, let's give our speakers a virtual round of applause, and I'll do that here on behalf of our attendees. We have much more in store for you that you don't want to miss. We have an excellent lineup of faculty that will be addressing issues related to building research training programs, mentorship teams, regional perspectives from Asia and Africa, bridging the gender divide in research, and much, much more. We look forward to seeing you all again on Thursday, the 27th of August at 4 p.m. Karachi time, 3:30 p.m. Afghanistan time, 2 p.m. Nairobi, or 7 a.m. Durham time. And with that, on behalf of Dr. Samad and the rest of the team, we thank you for attending, and this session is now adjourned.